Hi, my name is Amy Pavlina, and I am going to walk you through some ways you could adapt the Unit 4, Day 7, Student Protections Under the Constitution lesson with your class. So this lesson is a lot to do with students having what kind of rights in the classroom and in the building. Just because they're in school, does that mean that they do not have rights, or do they have rights? So you're going to first dive into a scenario. To scaffold this for your students a little bit stronger, I suggest reintroducing the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights and have students interpret what it means to have expression. Then, have students brainstorm ideas where their freedom of speech could be hindered in the classroom and while at school. This could be on a Jamboard, a Nearpod, or just discussion in your classroom. Maybe you're asking them different questions, such as, should you be allowed to wear hats in school? Are you allowed to not wear a uniform in school? Have them think about it, because they have to relate to where expression is not only what you're saying or writing, it's also how are you presenting yourself to the world, and how are you presenting your ideals to the world. Then I introduce the scenario, and then at the end, you have to make sure that after students are doing their independent work, you don't forget to have them share out at the end to really help you solidify what they're taking away from this. So let's go to the first part. Reintroduce the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights and have students interpret it. So the First Amendment guarantees freedoms concerning religion, expression, assembly, and the right to petition. So religion's really easy for students to get. Assembly, they can understand that if you're saying, oh, we go to have an assembly in the auditorium, we're assembling, or the right to petition. That they can understand with petitions. Expression is where I notice students are really struggling with coming up with a bigger definition as to what expression is. They just think very to the point. It's what you can say and what you can't say, how you express yourself. So you have to dig deeper into what is expression. So you can do this by having students brainstorm ideas where their expression could be hindered in the classroom and while at school. So again, you may need your students to think outside of the box for expression. Many get stuck on speech as the only form of expression. They need to be nudged to think about religion, clothing, ideals. So let me show you a Jamboard that I made. And for my students that are having a hard time, I start to insert pictures and get them to think about, well, what's this picture mean? How does this show expression? So let me show you. So here's a Jamboard I created, and I let students really think about what is expression. I keep the pictures off till the end, but I have them ready to go to drop in at any time. So I start to get them to think about things that they've seen. A Black Lives Matter t-shirt, wearing that to school. Is it okay? Is it not okay? Why or why not? How is it expression? Maybe even the way they draw a picture and how they're drawing people, that's expression. A do-rag, a yarmulke, any kind of clothing that people are wearing for religion or maybe their own style. Can it be expression? Is it allowed in a school building? Does anyone have the right to say anything about it? Maybe you might even have to dive a little bit deeper and even talk about nail polish being a form of expression, or makeup being a form of expression, or the way that someone's drawing a picture of their family life, having their personal beliefs from outside the building come into the building. And you really have to draw the line for students to tell them expression is not something you lose once you come to school. You still have the right to express yourself so long as it's not mentally or physically hurting someone else in the building. So let's go back in to see what we would go to next. So after that is done, I introduce the scenario. So here's the scenario that you have for the lesson. Fourth grade students are outside at recess. Student A begins making fun of student B. Student B punches student A punches student B back. Who was right? That's what they're going to really discuss. Was student A right? Was student B right? Have a discussion on this and have students use accountable talk. So have them really define, I think that student A was right because, or I disagree with you because. You want to make this a respectful discussion and a safe place for students to speak about what their opinions are as you get into deeper topics. If your students aren't speaking that much during the discussion time, maybe one thing you can do is poll the class. Put a poll on Google Meets or put a poll on Zoom and have students represent their opinion and why. You'll have at least one student who will say, yeah, I agree with student A because, and one to have an agreement with student B. Or maybe you don't. Maybe that's something you could discuss as well, that your whole class agrees with one or the other. Finally, you're going to want to not forget to have students share out at the end. So after they do their independent work, you want to revisit what they did during independent work. So why do you think students ignored the rule? Do you think that the school banning armbands was fair? Why or why not? Maybe you could really bring that back to what's happening at your own school. Maybe your school bans hats in the morning. They have to take hats off. That's a big thing in public schools. What's the difference between wearing a hat versus something else on your head? Is it fair? Why or why not? Why did the Supreme Court decide that the ban was unconstitutional? So again, you're having students take their knowledge and they're bringing it back to the class to share out. What would make banning an act of free speech in school constitutional? So they have to go back into, is it hurting someone or is it hurting someone's mental health? And what questions do you have about your First Amendment rights as a student in school? If your students are really diving deeper into this and they're really saying, well, Miss, this was during the Vietnam War, that was a long time ago, this no longer could be happening. I have an article that you could bring up for students to use, and it's from a 2016 Washington Post article, and it's about an Arizona school banned a student from wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, so she boycotted her school. She wanted to wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt to her school picture, and she was forced to take it off. And this is happening in 2016. So if your students need that context of this is still happening in America, and yes, as a student, so long as you're not hurting someone mentally or physically, you do have rights to free speech. And let's go back to that Jamboard, and you could just put this on right from the slides from the lesson on day 7. You could take a screenshot and you could put it straight onto a Jamboard. And then you could put the question, do you think this is still going on in 2021? And really gauge what you think your students know and what they're really seeing around the world and around them. Where does their knowledge extend to for freedom of speech? I hope that this has been helpful to kind of guide you in synchronous instruction and bringing the class back to wrap up the lesson.